Let's go on for about a half an hour, if we will. We have questions, comments from the floor. Let's make it questions more than comments. Yes, go ahead.
Well, no, you're an educated person and thoughtful, and you said that you can't say, I make the statement, I know there's no God. I may sound arrogant, but I know there's no God. And the reason I say that is because before I say something exists, I have to have some evidence. And if all the evidence says it don't exist, then I know it doesn't exist.
Well, I'm using it in a philosophical sense and in a scientific sense, which is you can't prove a negative.
Right. So the negative is somebody was saying, how do you know there's no God? You can't prove a negative. The negative is saying, well, there may be a God because So I think.
Well, we're arguing the semantics of the word no, but I would never say that because I do believe in the philosophical and scientific principle that you can't prove a negative.
At least
but I completely agree.
Yeah, I'm curious as to the philosopher's position.
I think actually that one needs to be careful.
Let's say the negative. How can you say that there's no God? How can you prove that there's no God?
I can't.
Then there's no God.
No, but
like if I ask you, can I prove that Jupiter exists? Yeah, I got evidence.
Sure, you can prove a positive, but that's
my point.
However, I would just add a caveat that because I do, as a philosopher, I do hear a lot this thing that, well, you can't prove a negative. It depends. It depends on the size of the relevant world, right? So if we're talking about something like God, Susan is absolutely correct. You cannot prove a negative in that sense because the size of the relevant universe is literally the entire universe. You can't search the entire universe and look for God and say, well, I looked everywhere, there is no God, therefore I know. But, for instance, it's very easy to prove the following negative. I do not have $1 million in cash in my pockets. Because the universe, the relevant universe is very small. You can actually search me. You can, do whatever you need.
Exactly.
And you can prove that.
You can prove a negative, just as you can rule out a particular bacteria as the cause of a disease. That's true. If the universe is small enough, you can prove a negative. You just can't prove that there's no such thing as free will or no such thing as God.
Because there the universe is huge, and so there's
unlimited.
On that subject of free will, which you were discussing, and this is to both of you. Daniel Dennett has argued that the argument against free will is really based on physics, whereas the argument should be biology. He said, because of biological processes and because of the development of consciousness, there exist things that are not that are not limited by physical laws, the ideas in our heads. And therefore, he said, the argument against free will is the wrong argument when it's based on physics, and it should be based on biology. Your opinions?
Want to go first?
Sure. I mean, bracketing the fact that we could have an entire discussion midnight on free will. I think that if I understand the way you just put it, I think then it is pretty much correct. That is, physics is in fact a bad argument. The typical argument against free will is, well, look, the universe is made of quarks, or whatever the latest thing that physicists tell us the universe is made of. And since everything is made of quarks, including you and I, and we all have to obey the laws of physics, the laws of physics are don't leave room for anything other than the interaction between quarks. So where do you get this free will thing from? The standard answer, or one of the standard answers at the biological level is yes, but at levels of complexity that are much higher than the one that fundamental physicists talk about, there are such things, or there seem to be such things as emergent properties. There are behaviors of complex systems that are still perfectly lawful from a naturalistic perspective. There's nothing supernatural going on, but they cannot be directly reduced to the fundamental level. If that's the case, then you can get free will by emergent complexity.
Right.
Well,
that's also, your opinion.
Yes, I agree.
Also, there's something. Did you say the ideas in our head are limited or not limited by?
Not limited.
Yeah, well, I think that the ideas in our head are not limited by biology. Now I'm almost taking the opposite point of view. I think the idea that our ideas are not limited by biology is not true. I think the ideas in our head and our capacity for thought in fact, clearly are limited by biology. If you are born, for example, with a chromosome that gives you Down syndrome, the ideas in your head are limited by your genetic background. This is not to say to get into any racist theory of the ideas of races, but as individuals, the ideas in our head, and I don't mean the expression of them, but our very capacity to think, even though we don't like to think it, is to some degree limited by our genetic endowments, which I have no desire to probe into by having my own personal genome mapped. But I think to say that the ideas in our head aren't limited by biology is questionable too.
Yes. And then we'll move beyond the first row.
I have a question for Mr. Jacoby. On a more practical level, given the history of the atheist movement in the 20th century and antagonism toward it, would you say that many strides have been made on a civic, local, state level? When many people think of personalities such as Madalyn Murray O'Hair and some people who would be considered crackpots, would you say that there are things that are actually going on where forward movement has been made, or are we really going backwards?
Oh no, I don't think we're going backwards. I think first of all, and I think this is due to the new atheists. I think many more people are coming out as atheists today than were, even though it's not as many as I would like. But I think the very fact that many more people are saying it's all right to call yourself an atheist, and why I think this is important is, and I want everybody to understand, I am not saying that atheists were discriminated against in the same way that gays were discriminated against. What I think is important is, I think the success and the change in public attitudes about gay rights in the last 10 years even, and 20 years, is due almost entirely to the fact that once the process of coming out and saying who you are started, people were forced to, they had a stereotype of what a homosexual was in their heads. And suddenly, their son, their brother, the kid down the street, somebody's teacher, somebody they respected, somebody's minister comes out and says, I'm gay. And when somebody you have other reasons for liking says that you're gay, then people have to, they can do what the fundamentalists did about Darwin, which is say, never darken my door again. Or they can say, well, you know, maybe I need to be re-examining my ideas about how terrible it is to be gay. Well, I think that in that respect only it is the same thing, and it's why I hate it when atheists who are really atheists try to hide who they are. Because I think, you know, if you're a neighbor and if somebody has an idea of what an atheist is, and somebody nice down the block says, well, you know, I'm an atheist, and there have always been traditions of the village atheists, but the more people know that there are people who are atheists who really don't have horns, I think the better it is in terms of getting ideas considered. It's certainly, I wouldn't call this any golden age, as I said. I think that these interfaith services at which don't acknowledge any secular component, I think this is an example of how far we have not come. The assumption that just everybody has a religion and everybody believes in God. But I do think the willingness of more people to acknowledge this is very important.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Terry? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Mr. Jacoby, I'm going to revisit the free will thing again, if you don't mind. You said you see no practical difference between a society that believes in free will and one that doesn't.
But that's not what I said.
Oh.
I said in a practical sense, even if we don't have free will. I'm not talking about believing in free will. We have to act as if we do. So I'm saying, what I said was actually the opposite of what. I didn't mean to say there is no difference between a society that believes in free will and one that doesn't. Isn't that what you just said you thought I said?
I think my question still holds somehow. I guess my point is the legal system, the pillar of retribution that holds up retribution is free will. You did this crime, you meant it, therefore we get to take this ultimate punishment further than that the expense, more expensive than if we just held you in prison for life imprisonment or something like that. And it's that retribution.
You're talking about the death penalty now.
The death penalty, yes. So wouldn't a society that says, there for the grace of genetics and the luck of the environment go on, will just separate you from society and not take any kind of ultimate punishment on you because you're a bad person?
I suppose that's possible, but I'm opposed to the death penalty not because I don't believe in free will, and not because I believe and not because much behavior is genetically determined. I'm opposed to the death penalty because of what it does to people who administer it. I think a death penalty, the willingness to kill someone, coarsens a society. I'm not concerned with the person who is the object of the death penalty. I'm concerned with what it does to society. My opposition to the death penalty has nothing to do with my views on free will or that the person didn't have free will. I'm opposed to the death penalty, even though I do think the legal system has to be based on the idea that we have free will, sure. And unless we are clinically insane, right. Then we have to be held responsible, because for the simple reason that you can't live in a society that doesn't act as if people are responsible for their actions unless it is obvious that they aren't.
What was Ingersol's position on the death penalty?
He was opposed to it, as most free thinkers have been throughout history.
Yes.
Just one little addition on the free will, whether it makes a difference if somebody believes it or not. The interesting thing is that there is some research that seems to indicate that people who don't believe in free will are more prone to unethical behavior than people who do. So there you go. As a belief, it seems to have actually some measurable effects.
I'd like to see the studies. Yes. Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Oh, well, actually, just when you were talking about the death penalty and all that, I thought before, I wondered whether, how you feel about eating meat and killing animals. I mean, is that...
About eating meat and killing animals?
Yes.
I feel really conflicted. The animal rights movement has, I think this is an example of something. I eat meat. I like meat. I feel really conflicted about it, though, and I don't think that just the idea of more humane slaughter, it doesn't answer it for me, and yet I'm not willing to become a vegetarian. This is not, by the way, this is not the only example of my doing certain things in life about which I'm conflicted. But I don't think any of the humane slaughter arguments answer the ethical arguments about the eating and killing of animals, no.
Also how they're raised is an ethical
issue. But I still, even if an animal was being raised in the most pleasant of circumstances, but was being raised there to end up on my table, I can't offer that as an ethical justification. I can't. That I'm doing something, you know, that is ethically questionable by my own standards is true, eating meat.
Right. Yes, you have.
What about abortion?
Could you? I'm sorry.
What about abortion?
What about abortion?
Yeah.
I don't believe that embryos are human lives. In that respect, I take an absolutely legalistic posture. It's obvious that every embryo is a potential life, but as we know from the fact that miscarriage is more common than the actual implantation of an egg in a successful pregnancy, therefore not all embryos end in live births or even the possibility of them. I do not consider embryos to be human beings with either the legal or, if you want to put it in a broader sense, the ethical rights of human beings. And yet, if you say that all human life begins with the formation of an embryo, it's true, but it's not all meant to be human life.
So we can eat embryos then?
We do.
Okay, this gentleman here. Yeah.
A question about your book about Ingersol. Do you mention the 13th Club at all?
The 13th Club?
The 13th Club, the group that met on the 13th of every month. I believe Ingersol was involved in.
I know.
Who was a member of the 13th?
I know nothing about it.
The original 13 Club. You don't know anything?
No, I really don't. I admit it. I don't know anything about it.
Okay. Fellow with the blue shirt. Yeah.
Hi. I love your book. I read it twice. And, sorry for me later. I'm a recovering Catholic, and
I can't hear you.
okay. I loved your book. I read it twice. I'm a recovering Catholic. I'm the father of twins who were born in vitro, and I know people that would say what I did was wrong, and I don't care. And it didn't help. Couple of things. When I was reading your book, you know, I know Ingersol, we need to bring him, let more people know, is the last part of your book you spoke about. And it's incumbent on all of us to spread the word about what he did in his great life. You mentioned several other folks that I think need more, Abner Neeland, Helen Gardner, C.B. Reynolds. Those are other folks that we should know more about, we wrote about.
Yeah.
Okay. The last thing I want to ask you is, you've written about the Catholic Church and Pope Francis, and I share that name, Francis. He was a Jesuit, and is a Jesuit, but he wants to reach out to atheists. Do you think that's really authentic
No.
dialogue?
No, I am sure Pope, well, all of the Catholic popes of the 20th century, but particularly the last two, have seen the growing secularism of Western Europe and America as a great threat, as they should. But by reaching out to atheists, he means he wants to convert them. I mean, he doesn't want to reach out to atheists in the sense of considering that we might be right, quite obviously. And speaking, it's interesting that he reaffirmed he has a long history as a theological conservatism, as a theological conservative. And by the way, one of the problems with the secular movement is the American media. The coverage of the ascendancy of Pope Francis is one of the great examples of it. Almost nowhere, for example, except in the New York Times, did you find a good examination of what Pope Francis's actions were when he was a cardinal under the fascist dictatorship in Argentina. And they were disgraceful and abysmal. In contrast to many other Catholics, including Catholic bishops in Chile under the colonels, who held up who were very forceful in their denunciations of what was being done. So, and I think the uncritical coverage of the American media, oh, the pageantry, oh, the white smoke, oh, he lives in an apartment instead of the papal apartments, and oh yes, he's still saying, you nuns, you're idiots, you're less than the men in the church.
Right. Yes.
So I have a follow-up actually on the 13th. As it turns out, there is a connection. In New York, at the December 13, 1886 meeting at the 13 Club, Robert Greene Ingersol was in fact present, and he gave a toast entitled "The Superstitions of Public Men," which reads in part, "We have had enough mediocrity, enough policy, enough superstition, enough prejudice, enough provincialism, and the time has come for the American citizen to say, hereafter I will be represented by men who are worthy not only of the great republic, but of the 19th century." So yeah, there is a connection.
I didn't know that.
I'll just Google that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, this gentleman.
Modern technology.
Yeah, go ahead.
Granting that everything you said at the end of your remarks is completely correct about people today just not knowing very much about religion, and that accounting for a lot of the growth of the nun segment. My question is, why is that necessarily a bad thing? Why is the fact that we don't know much about religion today any different from the fact that we don't know much about alchemy or examining entrails of animals to predict the future?
Oh, well, actually, first of all, I don't think that any educated person can be educated in any culture if they don't know anything about religion, because religion is a powerful force in history. I would argue that it has occasionally been a positive force, on balance a very negative force. But to say that, and in fact, I think knowing something about the difference between alchemy and chemistry, you actually have to know something about alchemy before you understand why chemistry is science and alchemy isn't. But I think knowing about religion, first of all, to know about it is to see the overwhelming majority of people in the world, except in Western Europe, believe in religions and believe in God. If you're going to say that it's all right to call yourself educated and not know anything about those religions and what has formed those people and what continues to form people in our society today, how can you even argue with them? And also the principles of secular humanism, principles associated with atheism, and the idea of an evidence-based world rather than a supernatural world. If you don't know anything about that supernatural mindset, how can you do anything to combat it if it is absolutely unknown and incomprehensible to you? And then, not to mention that you can't interpret anything from the past, can't go to the Metropolitan Museum and know half of what you're seeing because three-quarters of the art there is about religion.
Right. If I may add, and I don't know if Susan would agree, but I'll just like to interject my own thought on this. I think a problem that a lot of secularists and atheists have is they reduce religion to nothing but beliefs and omit the fact that religion is also the basis of mass social movements. It has a history, a sociology, and so on and so forth that may indeed center on beliefs but are not exhausted by the beliefs themselves. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can I get your opinion on what you think of how the religion before would give people what to believe, where they're to go, give meaning in their lives, but as the scientific method came out at the turn of the 20th century, people saw these answers, so they went to religion to find answers, and they gave them irrational answers. And so more people moved towards leaving church, and more people each year, less people each year go to church in the U.S. than the year before. And do you think, what is your comment or opinion on how a lot of people say spiritual, not religion? Religious, and I heard the chuckles about Deepak, which I agree with, but that people are trying to search for something, so they're going to this spirituality kind of thing. How does that relate to your opinion of the religion and the scientific method and the atheist? How do you see all of that, the whole spirituality part of it?
Oh God, I really need to go to the bathroom. I don't know how to answer this. First of all, I'm spiritual but not religious is an expression I hate. I really hate it. And the reason I hate it is not always, but it's often meant to say, I'm not religious, I don't go to church, but that doesn't make me a bad person. So I think that's what a lot of people mean by saying I'm spiritual but not religious. And I don't know why anybody who is not religious has to say that. You know, that's like saying, you know, I'm not a murderer, but I'm not religious, or I'm intelligent but not religious, or you know, it's looking for some kind of redeeming factor to couple with not religious. Now, I will make an exception. It does not apply to anybody who lives in New York City. I received this piece I wrote in the Times was reprinted a week later in the Dallas Morning News. And on my author website, I got tons of emails from Texas, from atheists in Texas. And some of them from people in small towns brought me up short on something I should have realized. People saying that they said they were spiritual but not religious because there was so much prejudice where they lived against non-religious people, and they didn't want their children to suffer for their own beliefs by their coming out and saying, I'm an atheist. And I think when you live in places like New York, you forget that there are still a lot of places in this country where people feel that they can be and can be penalized, if not economically, strongly, socially, for saying this. So I think I wrote the person back and I said, that's a good point. But I don't think that's why anybody in Manhattan says I'm spiritual but not.
No, but I can give you a practical tip. On New York dating sites, if you see spiritual but not religion, not religious, that's code for New Age.
Yeah, that's
so you might want to stay away from those people on that basis.
That's true.
Okay.
But Christian mingle is exactly what it says.
Okay, let's take, I see two hands up. We'll end with these two questions. Yes, that gentleman and that's this gentleman. Yeah.
I think a lot of people who won't accept Darwinian evolution, for example, are afraid of the consequences. They feel personally that their own morality is based on their religious belief, And I have a hard time imagining that one could be ethical and accept Darwinian evolution. What did Ingersol have to comfort such a person or give reassurance to them or to anyone that without religion, people can be moral and society can function ethically?
Well, first of all, what Ingersol said is what I say, which is religion is the burden ought to be on religion, given its ethical record of slaughters and inquisition and genocide. Why doesn't religion prove to me that you can behave ethically and be a Catholic, or behave ethically if we were looking, for instance, at the record of the way the Israelites conquered the land of Canaan by forced conversions or death? If you were looking just at that about the history of Judaism, then you would say, Judaism, you ought to prove to me that you can behave ethically. Why on earth does the person who does not believe in the supernatural have any more reason to prove that they can behave ethically than the person who has religion? Our prisons are full of people who are religious, extremely religious people. Religion, there wouldn't be any need for the Ten Commandments if written into law if religion had been a great barrier against people doing the worst possible things to their fellow human beings. I think religion, what those people say is, if God isn't your father, then you can't treat people as your brother. I would say, what Ingersol said and did say over and over again, that you treat human beings the way you would want to be treated, not because they are created by the supernatural being who is telling you that you're going to be rewarded in heaven or go to hell for not doing it, but because you are human beings. They are your brothers and sisters. And I think, by the way, to get back to the whole question of animals, the reason the animal rights movement indeed has more traction today is the more people accept evolution, the more the hard line dividing one species from another, don't you think, becomes less ethically defensible in your own mind. And I don't think, by the way, that originally that the reason Darwin's theory was so disturbing was even moral. It was the really high opinion that the biblical version of creation has given us of ourselves with dominion over the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Who wouldn't want to be told? Forget about morality. Who wouldn't think it was better hearing for the first time that not only do you not have dominion over the birds of the air and the beasts of the field, but you are related to them. But you are related to them. That is, I mean this seriously, and I'm not trying to be funny. It's a big blow to the ego. As Ingersol opened his lectures, he said, my first thought when I read on the origin of species was how awful it will be upon the nobility of the old world to know that they're descended from the Duke orangutan and the Princess chimpanzee. I know it's still funny today. Humor travels so badly over time, but some of these things
that one is an exception.
They're still funny.
I have a small comment about that. So the answer, there are two possible categories of answers, I think, in practical terms. If the person is sort of intellectually minded, then that person might want to pick up a good philosophy book, which are plenty of exactly that kind of alternative to morality to the morality offered by religion. But the other alternative is just very, very practical and goes back to what Susan was saying a few minutes ago, which is just go around and show them that you behave morally, and they'll follow. They'll see that that is in fact possible. It's the same exact argument about the gay rights.
Yeah.
Okay, one final question. Yeah.
I'd just like to follow up on the issue of education about religion. As you know, Daniel Dennett, in his book, Breaking the Spell, advocated for mandatory education about world religions, I believe starting in grade school. And that's always seemed to me such a sensible idea that I wonder why it's not gotten more traction. I was wondering what you thought of that, and is that something that you think the non-religious community should take up more actively as a cause to promote?
Me personally, and I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about it, no. And I'll tell you why. Because we do such a bad job of teaching even the basics in school that I literally, I find it unimaginable to think that anybody could fairly give any real kind of knowledge to elementary schools about religion. I think that education about religion does belong as an elective at the very highest high school level or at the college level. But also, there is in our society, there is a very practical reason for my opposition to this. It is a source, we haven't even been able to get huge numbers of teachers in America to be able to say the word evolution in their classrooms instead of development over time. I say, let's talk about educating kids about world religions after we've educated them about science and reading, and after the Texas School Board doesn't replace Thomas Jefferson with Thomas Aquinas on its list of writers who've influenced revolutions.
Yeah, actually, this may be one area where I do disagree with Susan. Despite the fact that I certainly agree that the status of the state of public education in the United States is horrible, and it's not getting any better because of the fixation with standardized tests and all that sort of stuff. But I actually do think that not only an introductory class to sort of world religions or something like that, which you could train teachers to do, because right now they're absolutely not trained, but I actually would add a mandatory class in basic philosophy. Because I think that one of the things that, and that could be done, I don't know at what level exactly you can study, but it's certainly, there are actual curricula out there at the middle school level and above where they can do it. Now, yes, it is a question of resources, it's a question of priorities and so on and so forth, but I think it could do a heck of a lot of good.
Right. Before we close, I want